Welcome to the next session, From 0 to 1 Billion and Beyond, the Linux Foundation eLearning Journey by Flavia Cioanca. Please give her a hand.
Hello everybody and welcome to this session. Thank you for taking the time to be here and not somewhere else. And please be patient with me. This is actually my first presentation ever at a conference, so I hope I'll be good. So my name is Flavia Cioanca. I'm the Instructional Design Manager for the Linux Foundation. And today I will talk about our journey from an instructor-led catalog to a diversified e-learning catalog that has attracted over 1.3 million learners worldwide over the past 5 years. I'll talk about how we started and some of the approaches that we used to reach this kind of growth. I'll talk about the challenges that we faced and some of the solutions and successes that we had, and what we've learned along the way, and also where we want to go from here. So for those of you who don't know, the Linux Foundation is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2000. The foundation is dedicating to building sustainable ecosystems around open source technologies to accelerate development and industry adoption. We provide support for open source communities around the world through financial and intellectual resources, services, training, events, and infrastructure. And we host over 150 collaborative open source projects under our umbrella, and more than 30,000 developers actually contribute code to these projects. We started out with Linux more than 10 years, 20 years ago almost. Almost. And Linux is the largest open source project in history, with massive acceptance in pretty much every sector, including government, education, and even film production. And then from there, from Linux, we really expanded way beyond Linux. And nowadays, the projects that we foster include, span over networking and cloud and blockchain technologies. And we really host some of the most critical open source projects that are in use nowadays out there. So what we try to do is really, although we're the Linux Foundation, we're a lot more than, we're just open source in general. Now, over the past 5 to 7 years, open source in general has experienced an unprecedented growth, both in use as well as in development. Major companies that were previously using proprietary software are now supporting, actively contributing to the development of, and also employing open source technologies. For example, Microsoft acquiring GitHub last year, or IBM acquiring Red Hat, a company that really open sources all of its products, are proof that open source is not just a fad, but it's here to stay, and it's pretty much the way we see it, it's the new way to develop technology. And it will be here to stay for the future. And this is done in a collaborative way that trespasses physical and organizational boundaries. Now, there's a pervasive myth surrounding open source technologies, and we talked, for those of you who were here during the discussion panel that we had just before this presentation, we actually touched upon this myth that open source software, because it's free, you should not train, because you should be self-taught. But again, if you really want to be good at it, you have to train. Just learning on your own does not really work, especially nowadays with all the distractions and the fast-paced world that we're in. Being a self-directed learner, you have to be very motivated, you have to be disciplined, and while it's not impossible, it's not doable, I would say, for most people out there. And that's where we come in at the Linux Foundation, because our philosophy is, even though we're fostering open source and the software and documentation is free, we do believe that if you want to be good at it, you have to train for it. And one of the things that we offer to people out there is training in open source development. So the 2018 Open Source Jobs Report pointed out the fact that a lot of the hiring managers are making it a priority to hire open source talent. But at the same time, there's not enough out there. At the same time, corporations nowadays prefer to train their employees on open source instead of bringing outside consultants like they used to do in the past. So again, the need for training. So at the Linux Foundation, what we do is provide affordable, vendor-neutral educational opportunities that really build the knowledge and skills to be really good at what you do if you are an open source professional. We provide instructor-led classes, self-paced online courses, as well as professional certification exams. And we started out with instructor-led classes a long time ago, and we have a very well-defined catalog. But along the way, you know, with the trends in learning, e-learning became really attractive. In the beginning, we were not, we had no experience, but we started to, you know, test the waters. And once we saw that we really are able to reach a lot more learners and provide this training in a more affordable way, we really started going this route as well. And then the next step was to develop certification, professional certificates. So we teach you the skills, but then you need to go out there to prove that you're good at it. And what better way than, you know, to have those skills and to have something to prove that you have them than through certification. So our strategy at the Linux Foundation, the training and certification team, we focus on three components. We start with introductory MOOCs, which are free, and they explain higher level concepts of open source technologies. And then we follow up with more advanced hands-on training, both e-learning and instructor-led. And as you build skills, you are ready then to become certified by taking up, you know, our professional certification exams. And I'll expand a little bit more on this strategy just so you have a better understanding of it. This all goes back to, you know, how open source is perceived out there in the world, really. While it's becoming more and more used in our daily lives, people are still a little bit uncomfortable and because they don't trust it, because they feel like it's not, you know, it's developed as a hobby. They're not even aware of how much is in use in everything that we do nowadays. And I was giving examples again in the discussion panel earlier. You know, Android phones are based on Linux. Fitbit watches are based on Linux. Infotainment systems in Toyotas and Lexus and other automotive brands are automotive grade Linux. Again, open source technology. Vitamix blenders, GoPro cameras, the infrastructure used by e-commerce leaders as well as financial markets. So it's really everywhere, we're just not aware of it. Cloud, networking, everything. So what we do with MOOCs, we want to bring awareness to open source technologies, what they do, how they can be used. We want to onboard you, you know, into the wider community, open source community. And then if you really want to be good at it, then you'll take, you know, the more advanced classes, which at this point are paid. They're not free. but they're really affordable compared to, for example, an instructor-led class. So I'll focus obviously on e-learning because it's the topic of the conference, and I'm not gonna talk that much on instructor-led. And then MOOCs, besides helping us, reaching a wide audience and helping learners get the skills and being introduced to open source technologies, what we use them for also is as a marketing tool. We get the contact list, for example, from edX, and then we market our training, paid training, certification, as well as other training materials that we have to those contacts if they opt in. So really, you can use those MOOCs a lot and reach as many people as possible. The instructor-led classes, or actually the e-learning classes, we started them basically converting instructor-led classes into e-learning, because what better way to do it? We already have the content, and the need is out there to be trained on. So we took that content for a lot of our instructor-led classes and we transformed them into e-learning courses. And we aim in all of our courses to have at least 50% of the time spent in hands-on labs, which are platform agnostic and distribution agnostic. So basically you can do them locally on your computer, you can do them in the cloud, in a virtual machine, on bare metal, it doesn't matter. And you can use any Linux distribution. We talk open source, so it will be on a Linux distribution, but it's the distribution of your choice. And the lab environment, we don't provide a scripted lab environment, because we want those labs to be agnostic. So we provide you the guidelines, and then you go and set it up yourself, whatever makes you feel comfortable, and you then have the instructions, step-by-step instructions on what you need to do in order to get those skills and learn how to use open source technologies. The rest of the time in our e-learning courses is spent on lectures, which are a combination of text, graphics, and videos. So again, nowadays the trend is to have video-based lectures. We don't use videos that much because we're teaching fast, advancing, dynamic, emerging technologies that can change every few months, and sometimes, within a few days, it's going to be different. So if we put out there video-based lectures, it's going to become very expensive and time-consuming to maintain them up to date. So that's why we really use videos whenever necessary, ideally on areas that are more stable and mature, and mostly for demo purposes, not for actual lecture teaching the content. That's where we use text because it's a lot easier and faster to update it, depending on how the technology advances. And then, so usually videos are 30% or less of our courses. And then we use quizzes and different other activities to engage the learner and really allow them to evaluate their learning. So we started out, we took our first step in the e-learning world back in 2014 when we launched the Intro to Linux MOOC on edX. We announced it early on in March and we launched it August 1st. By the time it was launched, it had over 250,000 enrollments. So it's a lot. At the time, because we didn't have experience in creating e-learning courses, we actually contracted a team of instructional designers that worked closely with our director of training, Jerry Cooperstein, who's also the course author, to convert an instructor-led training into this MOOC. And they worked over a period of 5 months to create this training. We also had a video producer that went to several Linux Foundation events and shot all the short videos that are in the course. So this particular MOOC really teaches immediately applicable entry-level Linux skills. Now, in terms of collaboration, I've touched on in the previous presentation or the discussion panel right before this presentation on collaborative learning trends that we notice in some of our forums. And I have to point out, the forums for our courses are unstructured, they're informal, and the moderator or the course instructor really takes a more peripheral role. That's by design. We want it that way. We don't want the instructor to step in and answer a question posed by a student the moment it's being posted. So we usually allow at least a few days, if not more, to see what happens. And that's where we notice this collaborative trend that is similar to what we see in open source communities, for example. In this particular course, we noticed that students that were more experienced and in Linux stepped in and offered their help and guidance to the more inexperienced learners. And so for us, forums are a way to connect learners, allow them to take an active role, and really participate. This is how we believe that communities are built. It's coming naturally. We don't try to force things in any way. All we want you to do is, be polite and be mindful, respectful to your peer learners. And as long as the information or the responses you provide are along these guidelines and obviously are targeting, are answering the questions that are posed in the forums, you're more than welcome to be in there. So with the Intro to Linux MOOC, what we noticed, for example, local and virtual study groups appeared. And students really posted, hey, I created this local study group. I'm here, let's meet. Or I created this virtual study group, and this is the link to how we can communicate. Let's connect. And we've seen a lot of engagement of this kind. And then also threads in different languages within the first week. Russian, Spanish speakers created their own threads to better explain to students that were coming from those particular countries or speaking those particular languages to better explain and provide assistance. So these are some of the things or some of the trends that we've noticed in the Intro to Linux MOOC. Nowadays, we have over 800,000 students enrolled in this MOOC alone. It's been through multiple reruns and updates, but it's continuing to be very, very successful. And ever since 2014, because we saw eLearning works for us in reaching our goal in building communities and supporting the open source communities, we actually created a formal team of instructional designers. I was the first one to join, and then last year we had a second instructional designer. It's a small team really, but we do a lot of work, and we work with the community and other subject matter experts out there to create our training. And so in 2015, we put out new MOOCs, a new rerun for this particular course, but we also started creating the paid e-learning courses. And those, again, were, we started by converting instructor-led training into e-learning. And then for specific technologies where we didn't have instructor-led courses, we started creating e-learning directly. And then the trend went both ways, from instructor-led to e-learning and from e-learning to instructor-led wherever the demand was high enough. Now, another really interesting thing that we did was back in 2017, when we launched our Introduction to Hyperledger Technologies MOOC. And I'll explain to you why we think this is a more unconventional approach that we took. So, first of all, the course instructors were a team that most of them learned the technologies that were featured in the course as they developed the content. So they were learners themselves. And then second of all, we targeted a blend of business-oriented and technical audiences in the same course without the use of cohorts. So the entire content was in one course without any differentiation for these two groups. Basically, the first 3 chapters of the course were addressed to a more business-oriented audience, introducing blockchain technologies and hyperledger technologies to them, use cases, when it's best to use, when it's not, and what actual uses are already out there in hyperledger technologies. Now, we knew or we expected that this might actually cause some problems with learners along the way, and it just happened it did. You know, when the course went live, immediately the forums started booming with students, especially the non-technical ones, complaining that they cannot really keep up with the technical part. They cannot do the hands-on part, which was the second part of the course. We provided very detailed explanations for those who were not technical enough, so they can just read and understand what's going on, and they didn't have to do it themselves, hands-on, but they wanted to. They really wanted to learn and get hands-on. So they started complaining because they didn't have the proper knowledge prerequisites and skills that they cannot do it. So again, this is another course where we see those collaborative trends in the forums, where the very experienced learners started guiding the inexperienced ones, step by step, explaining processes, explaining concepts, and even troubleshooting where these inexperienced learners had issues, because they were posting the outputs of what they were doing and were not able to proceed. And so the experienced learners actually started troubleshooting and providing pointers on what needs to be done in order for them to succeed and finalize the course. And this is very similar to what we noticed in the Intro to Linux MOOC. Now, in this forum, learners took it a step forward because they also wanted to start their own projects, at least some of them, in blockchain. It's such a hot technology out there. Everyone wants to have a piece of it. So they posted in the forum that they started certain projects, and they invited their peer learners to join. And from this approach, we got an idea to actually try an open source approach to content development. So in January of 2018, the Hyperledger Training and Education Working Group was formed. Nowadays it's known as the Hyperledger Learning Materials Development Working Group. And all the members are current and former students of the Hyperledger MOOC, as well as Hyperledger community members. And this group, what it does, their goal is to maintain and update the course content. They provide forum support, and they also nowadays develop training materials to support all the Hyperledger blockchain projects. And basically they learn while they do it, and it's all done on a volunteering basis. They meet on a bi-weekly basis. They report to the technical steering committee of Hyperledger. They have a charter, so they're very, very highly organized and motivated. Some members, you're free to come and go as you want. Some members will stop being active because of certain life events, and then months later they'll come back. Hey, I'm sorry I wasn't here. What can I do to help? So some of the things that this particular group did, within a few months they updated one of the chapters in the course, which became outdated because the technology advanced. And then in order to streamline the update and the maintenance of the content, so initially the course content, the source was not in GitHub, but what they did, they took all the content and put it into a GitHub repository. So just to make it easier for whoever wants to contribute to do it. Now, whatever they do doesn't go live immediately. It is reviewed by Hyperledger members, either a community architect or somebody designated by. If something needs to be updated or changed, it will be done based on feedback. And then eventually, once it's deemed good to go live, it will go live. And there's plenty of work around this group. And we're proud that, we took a chance in following this approach, and it paid off, really. So we really believe that the example of the Hyperledger working group is a great one of creating and expanding community of learners and integrating them also into the larger open source community. And this way we promote collaboration, we promote inclusivity, we promote diversity. Basically, giving learners a chance to contribute in any way, whether it is forums or a working group or any other way, it really empowers them because they take an active role, and it's creating not just a powerful online community and increases outreach, but it also promotes a relationship of trust, of mutual trust between and partnership. So I think the collaboration is really taken to new heights, and we really want to do that because in the end our goal is not just to put training out there, but it's also to expand our online or open source community. So what we did over the past few years from an e-learning perspective, we launched our first MOOC in 2014, 290,000 enrollments in the first run alone, over 800,000 today. In 2015, I joined the team as a full-time instructional designer, and we started developing e-learning courses on our own LMS. We continue to develop MOOCs as well, and we continued over 2016 and 2017, and we really expanded our catalog. In 2018, we launched our first professional certificate on edX, and we reached the 1 million enrollment mark on edX, which I think it's great. And we also hired a second instructional designer, so the team has expanded a little bit. And today we have over 14 MOOCs with multiple reruns on a yearly basis. We have 1 professional certificate, 22 paid e-learning courses. Where we want to go from here, we want to launch a new professional certificate this year. And new MOOCs and e-learning courses are in the pipeline already. Some of them are live this year. Challenges. We want to create great training. We want to expand the catalog and look for ways to make our courses more engaging. But there's always going to be challenges along the way, as I'm sure you're all aware of that. So for us, what are these challenges? Finding reliable and knowledgeable subject matter experts. We're teaching emerging technologies. It's not just, the lack of an open source talent pool. It goes the same way for subject matter experts. Choosing the right moment to put out the course on a open source technology is also not an easy thing, because we have to take into account how stable the technology is, what the market adoption is out there, what the demand is, what the future outlook is for that particular technology. Costs to create and maintain training. We are, after all, a non-profit organization, so we have to be really mindful of how we use the resources that we have. Keeping courses up to date, because technology changes as fast as possible. You wake up next morning and it's going to be different. And then last but not least is staying competitive in a market that is seeing more and more open source training opportunities becoming available. So what we do, or what can we do to overcome these challenges? First of all, we are in a unique position at the Linux Foundation because we have all of these open source projects under our umbrella, and we really foster the advancement of these technologies. So we have to take advantage of that particular position. We are at the source of the technology, so we have to put training out there for sure. We work closely with the community, with the open source community, because that keeps the costs low. This is where we find our subject matter experts. This is where we find volunteers to review courses before they go live and after. And this helps us, based on feedback, to improve them. They help us decide what kind of content to teach and when to go live. We listen to their voice, and we know what's going on out there and how it's supposed to look, in a few years from now. So that really helps us with our decisions. Keeping costs low, well, we use a small team and low cost or low budget courses. The fact that we don't use as much video, brings costs down for sure. To stay competitive and relevant, we're always on the lookout for different opportunities, new tools, different instructional design approaches to better our courses. And then another thing that we want to do when it comes to staying competitive is changing a little bit our approach. So far, our courses have been targeting only a technical audience. They went very in-depth into teaching skills, but as the market adopts more and more open source technologies, we have to also look towards a more business-oriented audience, because we need to teach them, use cases, advantages, disadvantages of using open source technology. So they have to be knowledgeable. And we've actually started slowly doing that, creating courses that are addressed to this kind of audiences. Succeeding in accomplishing our goals, it's not easy, but we are very determined to do what we do. And so building communities around open source projects and making an impact on technology around the world, this is what we do, on a daily basis. And why we want to do it is because code is not just code without the community. You need people to create the code, to make a project work. So that's why it's people plus code. And that's where we come in to really help build those communities and sustain them and give them the training and the knowledge and skills that they need to advance those particular technologies. So how do we create, how do we expand these communities? We always look at the bigger picture. So definitely we want to create an open source talent pool and close the skills gap. We want to help learners keep up with the technological advancements, but we also do give back to the community. So how we do that with LIFT, Linux Foundation Training Scholarship, with partnerships with different groups to promote diversity and inclusivity in open source communities. For example, Women Who Code, we partner with them, and we really help the women in the program to contribute more to the open source projects. We help them be more visible in the community. We help them with training opportunities. We partnered with Goodwill to provide training to underserved communities by providing free training, Linux training, and certification exams to those in the program. Onward to Opportunity, which is targeted towards active military personnel that is transitioning towards a private or public workforce. So we are part of that program as well, providing Linux training. So we know we reached 1 million learners, but our work doesn't stop here. We're humbled, because people are really interested in what we have to offer, but we're committed to really go the next step and do more for our communities and really help the open source communities out there. Any questions? Yes.
I found it really intriguing that that you open source the course creation process. That's really cool. I'm curious, was the format in native OpenEdX format, or was it in?
edX. We don't use OpenEdX. We only use edX, the edX platform. So that's it.
But I guess when people are collaborating on the materials, what is that? A Google Doc?
So
is it a Word
they
doc?
collaborated in GitHub repositories. They moved the content outside of edX into a GitHub repository, and
see.
that's where they collaborated.
And then you imported it from GitHub back into OpenEdX as Markdown. Or
Yes, but usually you don't need to put everything in. We just look at the pieces that they updated, and we move it back where it's needed in the course.
Okay.
So it's a more manual process because they work on their end from a technical point of view, and then I come in as an instructional designer and really look at what they did, and I may not use the content that they wrote exactly as it is. I may work on it, and put it into a different format to be more appealing to learners. So that's why it's not directly ported into edX all the time as is.
One other question, you mentioned that the discussion forums, they had different languages. Was there any interest in actually translating the course content?
Yes, we actually received requests to translate in Chinese, in Spanish. We haven't done it so far, but as far as I'm aware, it is being translated, at least Intro to Linux, in Chinese. And then we do have other courses, e-learning courses that are translated into Spanish, Korean, Japanese, and other languages as well. Yes, Stephen?
Can you just bring up the range of the things that you're teaching and which ones are your in-house LMS and which are the edX ones, just so people get an idea of what the breadth of the things you offer are?
So basically, if you go on our training page at the catalog, almost everything that is LFS 101, 10 something, it's on edX, except I believe 2 courses. Let's see. And then everything that is 200 level is the paid e-learning courses that we have, and they are on our own LMS. We're actually in the process of migrating to a new LMS with new authoring tools and everything. So things are looking really good in the future because it gives us a lot of new opportunities. Give me 1 second. So this is our catalog. For example, let me see. So all of the 200 levels, for sure, it's on our LMS. And then down at the bottom. Okay, so starting with Intro to Linux, the green one right there, everything going down is going to be, Intro to Linux, Intro to Cloud Foundry, Cloud Infrastructure Technologies, OpenStack, Kubernetes, DevOps, ONAP, OPNFV, Hyperledger, Apache Hadoop, blockchain, open source networking technologies. All of these are on edX.
So, and in general, who creates these and how do you resource them?
So all of the instructors are contracted. They're not, very few are in-house. The Intro to Linux is an exception because it's the director of training, and we have a few of the paid e-learning courses and the instructor-led equivalent. It's, again, the director of training who's the instructor. But most of the courses are actually, we have instructors that are contracted from the community, either established names in that particular technology, or learners or people that are kind of starting up, and they use us to make their name known in out there, and we use them to create the content for sure.
2 questions related to the learning groups. One is, how did you start and then cultivate those groups? Like, do you have some sort of a call for support in the course that people respond to? And then 2 is, do you think that those kind of groups could work with a non-technical audience or a non-technical course? I mean, GitHub to me and polls and things like that seem a little advanced, but...
It is a little advanced. Even this particular group has issues because not all of them are, knowledgeable in GitHub. But I think looking at the trends, collaborative trends in your forums will tell you a lot. If you see a lot of collaboration between learners, like I mentioned, for example, in our forums, I think that that increases your chances of collaboration in a working group, for example, because they really have to be motivated. They're doing it on their free time. It's volunteering based, all of it. How do we attract people in the working group? So when it was created, we actually made an announcement publicly via social media, in the newsletters, and also in the course itself, we do tell people how they can contribute, not just to this working group, but also to the technologies themselves. We point them to the community pages for all of our projects that we have training on.
So I had a question about the labs that you guys run. Do you evaluate the student, whether the students complete the labs, or do you have any way of evaluating their progress on the labs? Or
so we
whether
don't
they do them right?
evaluate in any way our learners. Sorry, I'll step back a little bit. So on edX, you have to have graded assignments, right? So the quizzes and the final exam, those are graded. But in our paid courses, for example, where we have the labs, they're not evaluated in any way because there's no way for us to know what you're doing on your own computer or in a VM. We have no access to it. You are responsible for providing your own environment. So at the Linux Foundation, we employ a culture of trust. So we trust you that if you chose to take this course, you're gonna do it because you're interested in building those skills and acquiring that knowledge. If you don't, you're cheating yourself. Really, that's our approach. So as an adult, you are responsible enough to do it, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. But I just, do you ensure that the questions that you ask at the end relate to skills that would have been gained through the labs? Or what is your sort of instructional design philosophy with respect to how people actually, how you evaluate whether they learn? Because people need feedback, for instance. So they just get their own feedback by looking at the answer, or what is your thought on that?
So for quizzes in edX, for example, where it's graded, the exams are open book, actually. Again, if you're cheating yourself. And it's based on the knowledge that is in the course content, but also on knowledge that you get from doing the labs. So basically, I'm giving you, for example, a command, and I'm giving you 4 options of potential output, which one is correct. If you don't do it, you're not gonna know, or you can guess, lucky guess. But you have to do it really with open source technology, software. If you don't do it, you're not really going to know.
Hi, thanks for the talk, very interesting. I created with Dartmouth College the professional certificate C programming with Linux. I am myself Rémi Charroc at Telecom Paris Tech in Paris. And I created this MOOC on the Linux Basics command line interface on edX. And I do have a small problem now on edX because I'm a very open. I have a very open philosophy, and because of the new feature-based model,
Yeah.
more than 50% of the content is blocked, and you have to pay edX to unlock them. So I see here that all of your edX courses are still free, but still, if you want to access the graded assignments, now you have to pay, right?
Correct. But the way we do it is all of the meaningful content where you actually learn is available for free. And the quizzes are based on what you learn by, going through the content. We found a workaround actually to still be able to provide our learners with all the content that they need to learn. And that's, the quizzes themselves is mostly if you want to have a verified certificate, then yes, you can pay and access those graded assignments. But otherwise, everything is available still for free under a Creative Commons license. You can reuse it at your own will for whatever you want.
All right, and just to mention that we use Web Linux. It's a way to access Linux on the web, client side, 100% client side. So we don't need any server or any virtual machine that is kind of difficult to install for the beginner. Mm-hmm. So if you want to look at my course, you are welcome
Definitely.
to discuss with me.
Thank you. Stephen, you wanted to ask something? Okay.
We're at time.
Well,
so let's have another round of applause for.
Thank you very much.